Hello dear student, in the last class we have started a new topic that was related to hormone, and there we have studied about what are hormones, what are the definition of hormone, what are the defined site of from where that hormone generally secreted from, and at last in that video we have discussed about the different functional action of the hormones in our body secreted from the different endocrine system. In today's class, we will study about the action sites, means where are the sites where that generally hormone acts on, and what are their mechanism of action by which all that hormone generally shows their different functional action by different hormone secreted from different endocrine system. So don't waste our time. Now we will go directly into the topic of today's main class, that is mechanism of action and action site of different hormones. First one is depending upon mechanism of action. First one is hormones that generally act on cell membrane. Now in cell membrane generally different types of hormone they generally acts by different mechanism of action, but generally they are classified into three subclass of classification or mechanism of action, that is A, B and C. Now I will discuss about all that in different way and the different hormones that generally do that function of A, B and C one by one. The first mechanism of action is by promoting Ca2 plus secretion in defined method. For that A method, the different hormone that generally shows their action by this type of mechanism of action, they are insulin, glucagon, LH, FSH, ACTH. All that hormones generally shows their action in the cell membrane by this mechanism of action. What are the steps involved in this type of mechanism of action style? That is, first one is that will bind with the different receptor present in the cell membrane, and by binding with all that cell membrane they generally will control the production of intracellular CAMP or cyclic adenosine monophosphate synthesis. They will show their action either by increasing the production of intercellular CAMP production or by inhibiting the secretion of intercellular cyclic adenosine monophosphate synthesis. By that, it generally triggered the activation of different protein kinases. If that generally increases the synthesis of CAMP, that will lead to the increasing activation of protein kinase. If the CAMP is synthesis lessly or inhibited, then it also inhibited the action of protein kinase. So first of all, it will regulate the synthesis of intercellular CAMP, that will lead to the regulation or activation of protein kinases, and the activation of protein kinases will lead to the activation of CS2 plus, that generally acts as third messenger that helps in stimulating different organs or different functions that is important for our body. So that was the first mechanism that is generally done in cell membrane by all these drugs like insulin, glucagon, LH, FSH, ACTH. That insulin is generally controlling our blood sugar by decreasing the blood sugar level. Glucose generally increases the blood sugar by promoting blood sugar synthesis in our blood, and it will increase the blood. And both insulin and glucagon by controlling sugar, they generally controls the blood sugar level, and that generally helps to maintain the blood sugar balance in our body. And LH, FSH, ACTH, ACTH is generally helps in secreting testosterone. That FSH generally helps in production of follicles in female body. That's why they are called as follicle stimulating hormone. And LH, they are act as luteinizing hormone. That is also a very important hormone for the female reproductive system. The second type of action or mechanism of action that generally shows by different types of hormone in cell membranes. These are the second type of mechanism of action that is generally shown in cell membrane by different hormones. First is the hormones is ACTH, and the second one is oxytocin, and also the antidiuretic hormone or ADH. So these are the drugs, these are the hormones that generally shows their action by B type of mechanism of action that generally showed by all these of hormones in cell membrane. What are the outline of that mechanism of action? First one is the regulation of IP3 DAG synthesis that we have already studied in the receptor chapter when we have discussed about the protein kinase related a G protein couple receptor. We have studied about that IP3 and DAG. If you want to know what is IP3 and DAG means, you can go and check out our video related the G protein couple receptor that I have already discussed in my previous classes. You can go and check it out from my YouTube channel only. The first step is by promoting or by inhibiting the synthesis of IP3-DAG pathway, and that will increase or decrease the synthesis of IP3-DAG. Now, if that is activated, it increases the synthesis of IP3-DAG pathway. That will lead to the activation of protein kinase C activation. Okay, so when that IP3 or DAG synthesis is generally regulated by ACTH, oxytocin and ADH, they generally promote the synthesis of IP3 and DAG. That will lead to the activation of protein kinase C activation, and that generally will lead to the activation of phosphokinase C activation, and also the activation of Ca2 plus that will act as a third or tertiary messenger and helps in promoting different body function that is generally done by all these types of hormones secreted from the endocrine system. The third type of mechanism of action that generally showed by different hormone in generally cell membrane. These are called as third type of mechanism of action. The hormone that generally shows action by this is growth hormone and prolactin. Growth hormone and prolactin, how they are going to show their mechanism of action? They will promote the synthesis of tyrosine kinase activation. That promotion of tyrosine kinase activation will lead to the activation of protein kinase. That activation of protein kinase will lead to the phosphorylation. And that phosphorylation will regulate different functions that is done by growth hormones and prolactin. By that name only, growth hormone, you can understand that is somatic hormone that generally helps in somatic growth. That's why they are called as growth hormone. And second one is prolactin that generally used or they generally act as a factor that generally controls the secretion of milk from the mammary gland in female body. Now we'll discuss about the mechanism of action that generally showed by different hormones that generally act on cytoplasmic receptor. Plasmic receptor. We will now discuss about the different hormone that generally shows its action in cytoplasmic receptor by binding with cytoplasmic receptors. What are the hormone that generally shows its action by this type? That is glucocorticoids, then mineralocorticoids, then testosterone, progesterone, estrogen. All that drugs generally shows all that hormones generally shows their action by binding with cytoplasmic receptor and show their specific action. How they are going to show their specific action? First one is they will penetrate the cell membrane in the action of site, and that is depend upon the action site where that hormone generally going to show their action. First one is they will penetrate the cell membrane. After penetrate the cell membrane, they will bind with the cytoplasmic receptor. By binding with cytoplasmic receptor, they will activate the action of receptor, and by activating the receptor, they will travel to the nucleus of that cell, and by going to the nucleus, they will bind with their specific DNA, and then they will bind with their specific gene. Now, by binding with specific gene, they will promote synthesis of mRNA, and that synthesis of mRNA will lead to the production of different proteins that generally shows different type of action in our body and helps in producing the different action done by all that hormones like glucocorticoids, mineralocorticoids, testosterone, progesterone, estrogen, and we all know their actions like testosterone helps in increasing or promoting the male characteristics in male body. Progesterone and estrogen helps in the characterization of female when they come from infants or little age to the adult age. This hormone generally helps in characterization of all that male and female. These hormones generally act on, and their main mechanism of action is binding with cytoplasmic receptor and shows their action by promoting the action of cytoplasmic receptor, then leads to the nucleus transportation and binding with specific gene, produce mRNA synthesis, and that mRNA synthesis will increase the synthesis of different types of protein, and that protein will help in showing different type of action that generally regulates by glucocorticoids, mineralocorticoids, testosterone, progesterone, estrogen, etc. The last type of mechanism of action by which generally drugs hormone shows their action, that is at cell nucleus. What are the hormones that generally act by that mechanism of action? They are different thyroid stimulated hormones like thyroxine, tetrahydrothioronine, and parathyroxine. All that types of hormone generally shows their action by this kind of mechanism of action, and generally shows their action at cell nucleus. So first of all, that also hormones will penetrate the cell membrane, and after penetrating the cell membrane, they will go to the specific cell and will bind with that nucleus and before going to the nucleus they will bind with nuclear receptors, and that receptor will transport it to the nucleus, and in nucleus they will bind with specific gene present in specific DNA, and binding with specific gene and specific DNA it will promote the DNA, RNA and protein synthesis. So these are the mechanism of action that is generally showed by hormones secreted from thyroid and parathyroid gland like thyroxine, tetrahydrothioronine, parathyroid hormone. They generally shows their action by this mechanism. How they are going to show? First they penetrate the cell membrane and reach to their specific site of action, and there they generally bind with different nuclear receptor present in there. By that binding of receptors they generally transported to the nucleus of this specific cell. After reaching to the specific cell in nucleus they generally bind with a specific gene present in a specific DNA. By binding with a specific gene in specific DNA they generally promote the synthesis of different DNA, RNA and protein that generally helps and regulate the actions of thyroid stimulating hormones like T4, thyroxine, tetrahydrothioronine, hormones secreted from parathyroid gland, etc. So that was the last mechanism of action by which generally thyroid or thyroxine glands generally shows their mechanism of action and regulate different type of functions required for our biological growth. I have finished off the today's topic about hormones, and in today's class we have discussed about the defined site from where that hormones is going to transport from their secreted site and going to show their action at the specific site, and how they are going to show their action. That means the mechanism of action also we have studied today. So by that I have finished off the introduction chapter or brief introduction about hormones, their secreted part, their functions, where they generally shows their action, that means action site, and about their mechanism of action. And in the next class we will discuss about the drug related to hormone that generally used as the supplement of hormone to promote the action of hormones, or we will study about the drugs that generally act against the hormone and do the opposite action of the specific hormone. About all that drugs we are going to discuss into the next class. Thank you.